Hello and welcome to First Post. The pause between India and Pakistan seems to be holding, but the debate has now shifted to how that pause was achieved. Out of the blue, the US President Donald Trump announced that he brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. Since then, India has denied this, but the Pakistanis are heaping praise on the US President. So is this a case of the US President typically claiming credit for things that he's not involved in? And if not, what is the scale of US engagement in this conflict? To answer that, let me introduce my guest, John Bolton, who is the former National Security Advisor of the United States and also a former US Ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you so much, Ambassador Bolton, for speaking to us. Let's talk about the new nuclear debate first, which seems to have gripped the country, which is that the Indian Defense Minister says we should put Pakistani nukes under UN supervision. Is that something that you see the Pakistanis ever agreeing to? And if not, do you think the world powers can build enough pressure on Pakistan for some sort of supervision?
Well, I think that's a difficult road to walk, since the government of Pakistan, like the government of India, has never joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and really much of the IAEA's authority derives in essence from the obligations imposed by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is a difficulty. We face the same kind of issue with Israel, which, although it's never said so expressly, is widely believed to have nuclear weapons. It's not a party to the NPT. So it's a gap in the structure of the NPT and the anti-proliferation effort, but it obviously has implications for India as well as Pakistan. So my guess is that there won't be any progress on the idea, but it does say to, I think, countries in that situation, should we find a way to reconcile reality, which is to say status as possessing nuclear weapons, with inclusion in the broader non-proliferation scheme, because it's not in anybody's interest to see more countries get nuclear weapons. I first debated this question 20 years ago in the George W. Bush administration, and I'm confident that in the 20 years since then, no progress has been made on that point. But it is important, and it goes to security in South Asia, but really around the world too.
When this conflict began escalating, US officials wanted nothing to do with it. The Vice President said this is not our war and we're not going to ask either side to get involved. But as things heated up, clearly the Americans were a bit spooked. And then finally the President came out with that statement saying he brokered the pause in fighting. Do you think the President is overstating his role here, or do you think those last-minute phone calls actually had any sort of impact in the peace?
Well, I think from what I can discern from the outside, I do think the calls that Trump and Vance and Rubio made were helpful. I think certainly in both the governments of India and Pakistan assessing the broader implications around the world. But my guess is what really brought this to a conclusion was the decision by the Pakistani military that if they didn't stop at that point, there might not be another stopping place. And history has taught them very well that a full-out military confrontation with India is not likely to end well, even if it remains at the conventional level, as prior military encounters have shown. And they were reluctant to risk going to the nuclear level. So I think at some point Pakistan decided that they would test the Indian response to see if both of them could get off. And that, I think, is what happened. I think it was the military-to-military communication between Pakistan and India. But I think Pakistan took the first step. That's my sense of it.
Right. And since then, we've heard the US President repeatedly claim that he is interested in brokering peace and sort of mediating in the Kashmir issue, which once again, India has rejected. I'm wondering what sort of an impact these comments will have on the India-US relationships, especially on the defense angle of it, because India is looking to buy weapons from the United States, but you've got a president who says, I leveraged trade to ensure that India and Pakistan stop fighting. Those sort of comments, how do you think they will impact Indian strategic thinking, especially when it comes to buying American weapons?
Well, I think I wouldn't be surprised if that were the reaction by senior Indian officials. And all I can say is, having been experienced with Donald Trump myself, that's the way he is. He takes credit for everything. He's brought peace to the Middle East. If you look at what he's saying about his trip there, and it can be irritating to people. I understand that, but I think the government of India knows exactly how much influence Trump actually had, and if need be, quietly they can tell him how much influence he had. So I hope it doesn't. You only have 44 months of Trump to live with. So do we. Only have 44 more months. Try not to let Trump's aberrational behavior shape the view of American policy as a whole. Because I do think in the rest of the century, the U.S.-India relationship is the most important one for the U.S. The problems that India faces, that the U.S. faces, others like the other members of the Quad, Japan and Australia, with China and its hegemonic aspirations, push us in the direction of closer cooperation. And we should try as hard as we can not to let personalities get in the way of that.
So let's keep President Trump aside then and look at the last couple of decades. We've seen a repeated trend where Pakistan pushes the region to the brink of war and then the Americans come and bail them out. Pakistan goes to the edge of an economic crisis. Again, US-led multilateral institutions bail them out. What explains this US obsession with bailing out the Pakistanis? Is it, once again, does it date back to the Cold War? Is it about containing China in the region? Is it about hedging bets against India? What is this obsession with Pakistan in US policy?
Well, I've been dealing with Pakistan in one sense or another since 1982, when I was in the Reagan administration in the U.S. Agency for International Development. And as they say on Facebook, the relationship is complicated between Pakistan and the United States, up to in the post 9/11 period, the work that we did with them against the Taliban and Al Qaeda. But there have been troubling aspects, the development of nuclear weapons, and most particularly now, and in the past, I'd say decade more even in the past, and threatened in the future, is China's involvement. The media have reported that as of today, Pakistan has bought approximately 80% of its sophisticated weapon systems from China, which means U.S. sales are way down. But it's not the sales aspect, it's the influence aspect that kind of dominant Chinese position gives them. And I think that you can bet that Beijing is trying to take advantage of this most recent crisis in Pakistani military circles, particularly. And I think that's dangerous for India in the near term because of the threat on the subcontinent, but really dangerous strategically for everybody around the world.
You spoke about China and the role they're playing in Pakistan, and we know the sort of investments they have in Pakistan, and that brings with it a lot of political influence as well. Do you see the Chinese using that influence to keep the Indians busy on the western frontier while they go out on the other side?
Yes, I think that is precisely their strategy. They would like to outflank India on the west, and Pakistan geographically does exactly that. So if they made Pakistan an outrider in the axis that China and Russia have been creating, it's not fully perfected yet, but they've got outriders like North Korea, Iran, Syria, up until the Assad regime fell, Belarus, and others. I think this pattern is going to develop over the next several decades, and I think certainly India, being a bordering country with China in the region, needs a strategy to deal with this that's not kind of a country-by-country strategy, but looks more broadly. And I think the U.S. needs such a strategy as well.
Of course, Pakistan has its own set of problems. You've got separatists in Balochistan, you've got terrorists in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, of course, the economic issues. Do you feel that as Pakistan gets more desperate, as their regime becomes more and more unpopular, they could become more dangerous?
Well, I think the dangers of separatism are real, and I think that is one reason why U.S. administrations going back quite some time have felt that maintaining the territorial integrity of Pakistan is important, because it could be worse if the country actually did break apart, or if it gave rise to circumstances where internal Pakistani terrorists and supporters of terrorists like Pakistani Taliban could take control of the entire country. So that's part of the complication, and part of why, in my view, continued U.S. involvement with Pakistan difficult though it can be, and particularly in the circumstances now with the military government unambiguously in control, and popular politicians in jail. I'm not taking a side inside Pakistani politics, but I believe that kind of instability is yet another opportunity for China to try and increase its influence.
Right. And we saw that after last week's operation, India also rolled out a new national security doctrine of sorts, where we said that the next terror attack from Pakistan will be seen as an act of war and the response will also be in kind. Do you think that's a sustainable strategy going forward? And do you also think that the Pakistanis will be tempted to see if the Indian side is serious about that strategy?
Well, I think it certainly heralds a new approach by the government of India if it sticks with it. It does carry increased dangers. It would depend on how it was implemented. In the hypothetical case where there was another terrorist attack and the first Indian response, as this time, as in 2019, as in earlier cases, was retaliation against the terrorist facilities from which the attack had been launched and limited to that, then that's a signal to Pakistan that we can avoid escalation, as was more typically as typified the 2019 case. I hope that this is an opportunity, if Pakistan takes it, to sit down with India quietly somewhere, no spotlights, no attention, and try and address this fundamental problem of terrorist attacks that come from Pakistani soil. This is what motivated the United States to go after the Taliban after 9/11. It's perfectly legitimate for India to provide for its own self-defense. This is a self-defense issue, but the implications are obviously far broader than just attacking the particular source of the attack, the terrorists themselves. I don't think it's been in Pakistan's national interest for a long time to support the terrorist groups that it has. That's obviously not the opinion that prevails inside Pakistan. But that my sincere belief is Pakistan's never going to have the opportunity to develop in the way India has. If you go back to partition and look at the relative incomes of the two countries now, India is 4 times farther along than Pakistan is. So for the benefit of the people of Pakistan, this terrorist activity needs to stop. And how that happens is obviously very difficult. But if you want to try, as we say, to make lemonade out of a lemon here, after this attack, the two governments really sat down. There's no political posturing. It's all behind the scenes, and see what might be possible. If nothing comes of it, then so be it. But I think it might be worth the effort.
Now, one thing most Indian leaders have emphasized after this conflict is that nuclear blackmail will not work anymore. The last 1 decade, we've seen 3 conventional clashes between India and Pakistan. Thankfully, none of them have gone to the nuclear scale. So would you agree that both sides are now relatively confident that they can have a conventional escalation and a limited conflict without things reaching a nuclear sphere? Or would you say it's a bit of a stretch right now?
I think it's a stretch. I mean, I don't think this crisis or 2019, which is at a lower level, really was at serious risk of going nuclear. I'm not saying that the risk was zero, but it was not as serious as it might be. The next time you can't be sure, and that should mean for both sides that addressing the question that starts every one of these incidents, which is not disputes over border lines or territory. Those disagreements remain. This is something entirely different. This is an act of war caused by a terrorist group inside India, but based in Pakistan. And that gray zone there is really quite dangerous and threatening to India, and could happen in the reverse direction too. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying Pakistan ought to think about that, and it knows some of the threats and dangers it faces from Afghanistan. I understand the history here fully, and I don't say this with much optimism, but we're all still we have what just happened fresh in our minds, and if we can avoid the political posturing and do it behind the scenes, I think it's worth the effort.
Right. Finally, let me just ask you about one of the main characters in this escalating conflict, which was General Asim Munir, the army chief of Pakistan. Now, before he became the army chief, he headed the ISI, the Pakistani spy agency, for a brief period of time from 2018 to 2019. That was also the time when you served as the National Security Advisor in the United States. And that was also during the Balakot airstrikes. I'm wondering if you had any sort of exchanges or conversations with him. And even if you didn't, what you made of General Asim Munir and what he stood for in the Pakistani military. What's his ambition and long-term goal here?
Right. I didn't speak to him during that crisis in 2019 myself. I believe the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joe Dunford, may have spoken to him. We were in Hanoi. Mike Pompeo and I were in Hanoi, and our defense colleagues were in Washington. But obviously, as you know, in Pakistan, they call the military the steel skeleton. That really is the framework of the government, even when it's not so apparent as it is today. And it may be that the first way to go about discussions would be military to military communication. That's what brought the ceasefire into being. It's not going to address the full implications of the terrorist situation, but maybe that's a way that the Pakistani military would feel more comfortable initially, and could produce some results.
Well, like you just said, the Pakistani military does call the shots in the country, and they've been the one pushing this region towards conflict every time. India has made it clear that this is not business as usual, and the next terror attack will be an act of war. Let's just hope that the Pakistani military realize their mistakes and they decide to reform this action of supporting terrorists. Thank you so much, Ambassador Bolton, for speaking to First Post.
Well, thanks for having me.